Hi good people, in this video I'll show you how to set up a random encounter system that is similar to what you would see in the older Final Fantasy series. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Alright, so I have a scene set up here, a little bit of a camera transition. So I have my little RPG character, just a simple movement component with some sprite flipbooks, and we have just a Niagara effect playing for the snow. So what we want to do is we want to take this small little map and designate an area to be like a fighting zone. And then when we enter that zone, as the player moves around, it has a chance to generate a random encounter where the player's unable to move, and then there'll be like a battle transition, and then you typically go into your battle system, you finish the fight, and then you transition back to the player, and then the player's able to move after that. Just to keep the video short, we'll just worry about creating the logic that actually does the battle transition. We'll do the battle system in a different video. But starting off, I think we'll head into the player blueprint. I am using the third-person template, so I'll open the third-person character here, and that's who you saw at the beginning of this video. So we'll go to the event graph, and we just need to find an empty space somewhere, so we'll maybe drag out over here. We're going to create a couple different events, so we'll do add custom event. The first one we can maybe call our random encounters. This one is going to have an input that is going to be of type Boolean, and then we'll call it maybe just battle with a little question mark. Then we're going to want another custom event that is actually going to handle our random battle. So this one will basically enable and disable the random encounters mechanic. So if the player's in like a city and they're just NPCs talking, we'll disable it there. As the player traverses into maybe the overworld or some forest area, we'll enable the random encounters when they get in that little trigger zone, and then the fights will only start there. And then the random battle will actually is what triggers the fight logic. Now we of course need one last custom event that we can say the fight is finished or the battle is finished. Finish battle. That way we have a way to drop out of each of the various states for the setup. Now for the random encounters logic, we'll just come into a branch node, and we'll pass in our Boolean value as our input, and we'll handle that in a different one. If this evaluates to false, then what we're going to want to do is we're going to use a function timer that handles figuring out the distance the player traveled, and we're going to want to basically invalidate that timer and reset the distance traveled variable that we're going to be setting up here. But in the true section, we're going to need to track the player's movement. So we need a couple variables. The first variable that we can call is maybe our last location. And this is of course going to be a vector. And then we need a variable to track the distance the player has moved. So we can say distance traveled. And to make this easy, we're just going to do a float, so a single value. We don't have to worry about initializing that right now. We're going to leave it at 0. We'll set it up through code. We also want a variable to track a distance threshold to actually engage the trigger. So we can actually just call this our threshold distance. This one we're going to make public, and we will initialize this to a default value. I think I'm going to start with 1,000 units starting off, but you'll be able to set this in editor to whatever value you want. This is basically the amount of distance the player can walk around before, trying to engage the battle, basically. And I think starting off that's good. So off the true pin, we want to hold the Alt key, drag in our last location so we can set it. The way we can set it is we can get our player's capsule component, which everything is everything is a child of the capsule component in this blueprint. And we can get our world location, which is a transformation node that has a vector output. We can throw that in the input, and that works just fine. After we get our player's current location, basically, which we'll label as last location, we'll want to set a timer by a function name. We don't have the function defined yet, so we'll leave the name blank for now. but we want to run it in a very small interval. And we also want to run it on a loop. So we'll check looping. So the reason you might, you want to run this on a small interval is because if you run it on a longer interval, so like think 1 or 2 seconds, the player, that might be fine for your logic, but the player could move in some direction and then move back. And then the distance traveled would be smaller if it captures it on the way back, because it starts from where the player was versus how far the player's moving to, because we're going to get the magnitude of those two vectors in our actual logic. So you might want to run this at a little bit of a smaller interval so you can add up all the distance the player has moved into one larger amount. Now it might make sense to you where you don't want to do that and you want to do it a little bit slower so the player can actually, if they decide to turn around, you know, maybe that won't add up into their movement threshold, so they're able to move a little bit more. So maybe that is the behavior you want. But for this one, I want the classic RPG style where it's, you know, no matter where you move, the thing was tracking you and then it would throw you in those random encounters. We'll also want to promote the return value as a variable. We can call this our distance timer. That way we just have a way to store that. And then now that we have that timer, we can hold control, drag it out, and on the false pin, this is where we can clear and invalidate that timer. So basically kind of resets it. And then we want to set the distance threshold using the Alt key back to 0. And I'm sorry, not the threshold distance. This is, we want to do the distance traveled. This is how much the player has moved. So we'll set that back to 0. That way we can basically restart the logic loop for that setup here. And then for the random battle, I think what we can do is we'll come into a branch node. This is what actually dictates the actual fight. I don't want it to be a guarantee, so I'm just going to come into a random boolean. So it basically has a chance to start the fight, and if it doesn't, just for debugging, we could say you got lucky. That way we can see it actually did trigger. It's just that it'll kind of reset and give the player the option to move a little bit more. If it does evaluate the true, then we can grab our character movement script and we can adjust the set the movement mode. And then the movement mode, we're going to set it to be is none. So the player is basically locked into place, because this would be the point where you basically throw the on-screen widgets to do the battle transition, and then you actually move the player into the battle level or the battle screen, which we'll do in a different video. We of course will need a HUD reference to that, but we will create that in a second. So I think for now, we got the base of our logic here. The only other thing we'll want to do is obviously on the finished battle, we can just grab our character movement code here and we could set it back to walking. So we call this the player is basically able to move again. Now, if we go into our functions, we have the little plus sign here. We can create a new function that we can maybe say is track distance. And there's not gonna be too much to this. We basically want to get our distance traveled. We'll hold the Alt key to get a setter. And then we want to give ourselves a little bit of room here, because again, you're going to want to get the capsule component. So where the player is at, we can do get world location. So now we have the vector of where the player's at, and we want to subtract that by the last known player locations vector. So that'd be this last location right here. And then we want to take that result and we want to get the length, the vector length, which is also known as the magnitude of those two vectors. So think of it like you draw a line between those 2 points. It creates that little line segment. The length of that line segment, also known as the magnitude, would be your vector length. And that'll evaluate to a float value. Now you can't just pass this in. You actually do want to add this so it's, you know, additive, so it's cumulative, so it's basically always adding up. And you want to get your distance traveled. So get whatever current distance traveled has been figured out, and then add that to the new distance traveled, and then store that as our new distance traveled variable. So it's basically, as the player's moving around, it is slowly adding those small steps as a cumulative distance traveled variable, basically. Now, after we've done this, we of course want to update the player's last location. So we can hold the Alt key, get a setter there, and then we could do the same thing we did over here. Just Control D to duplicate that, pass that in over here. And then we'll also want to come into a branch condition. And then what we can do is we can take how much distance the player has traveled, and we could see if it is greater or equal to our threshold. And if it is, then what we'll want to do is we want to get our distance traveled, hold the Alt key so we get a setter. And this is going to be a little confusing, but I'll explain it in a bit. And what we can do is we take our distance traveled, subtract it by a random float within a range. I'm going to do, our min will be 500 units, our max will be 1,000 units. So basically, why am I doing this? If you remember on the event graph, for the random battle, it has a chance to trigger, basically, right? So it can sometimes get in, sometimes it can't. So in this one, I basically want to say, like, hey, no matter what happens, if it doesn't evaluate to true, or basically when it's after the fight's done, it's going to reset it to 0. And the chance that it evaluates to false, and we do the you got lucky, I want to give the player a little bit of room to continue walking forward. So basically, if we don't do this, it's going to evaluate to true on the immediate next run. So even though the player got lucky, they're not going to be able to move at all. So we want to basically give them a little bit of wiggle room. And then after this, of course, we will come into the random battle event that we created right here. So this is basically the core of our little function, and this will be, I think, most of the code in the player blueprint. There's one other thing we'll have to do, but we're not quite there. So let's go ahead and work on the level. So now we need to set up a zone where we can generate our random encounters. So let's go ahead and add in a trigger box. I'll drag this down, move this over. Then for my scale, maybe I'll do 3000 by 1000 on the X, Y, and Z. Kind of have this little thing going here, and I'll just push it over. Here's our tiny little map, and this is just the zone where the fights will happen. I'll push it out maybe a little bit. All right, but creating a trigger zone doesn't really do anything. There's no logic that drives that. It's just a thing to detect when things enter and exit. So what we'll want to do is we can come into our level blueprint by clicking this little icon and selecting Open Level Blueprint. And then we will want to right-click and add an event for the trigger box called Collision. And we'll do an Add Actor Begin Overlap trigger. Now, if you don't see that, it might be because you don't have anything selected. So if you go back into the thing, you'll notice I don't have that option there. So just make sure you come in and you have it as a highlighted option in your details outliner panel or in the world view. And when you come back, you'll see you'll have these events that actually show up, and then we can add in End Overlap event as well. And the overlaps are going to be simple. We simply cast to our player blueprint. In this one, it's going to be the third-person character. The third-person character inherits from player character. So So we'll do get player character to fill out the object field. And then as the player blueprint, I can then launch any events or functions from there. There's one that we created called random encounters. And this is the identical logic that we'll want in the end overlap. And actually what you want to do here, thinking about it, is you don't want to do player character. You can actually just pass in the other actor field. That way we make sure that the thing that overlapped the cast is the actual player. Otherwise it'll trigger on the trees and everything else. Now remember, on the random encounters event, we created an input that we can set a Boolean value. So, and you can see that's right here. So on the begin overlap, I'll set it to true, but on the end overlap, I'll set it to false. And that's how we actually control it. So when the player walks into it, it'll trigger the logic. When the player walks out of it, it'll end the logic. And that'll be how we kind of gate it going in there. Now, the main thing we're doing here is we're setting a timer by a function name, and we're running it every 0.1 seconds, but we never passed in the function name. We created the function, it exists now, so it's track_distance. So now that we have that set up, we can see if we can test this out. So we got our transition. We can walk into the trigger zone here. And then you'll notice I can no longer move. You can see my character is still, the flipbook's still running, but I can't actually move around. So my player's basically stuck. So this is actually working. This would be where we play, you know, some battle transition screen thing, and then we would go into the battle system. And then we need a way to exit out of it and give control back to the player so they can move around. So to be able to do that, let's actually create a material. So we'll go into our blueprints folder, right click, click material, and this will be m_battle transition. We're going to double click to open this up, and I'm going to dock this at the top here. With the material selected, I'm going to set it to be a user interface, and I'm going to set the blend mode to be masked. And then I want a texture sample that I can right click and convert to a parameter, and I'm just going to call my texture. We want to pass the texture into the opacity mask, but we don't have a texture selected. So what we can do is, let me have some examples here. I think I'll just grab maybe these two. We'll import them in here. And we'll double click these. There's only one change we need to make, and that is the X and Y axis tiling method. So instead of wrap, we want to clamp these so they don't repeat. And then same for this one. We'll set that to be clamp. Save that. We can go back into our material and we could search for our battle transition. We'll try this one first. And if I select the color, I'll maybe drag it to white. You can then see it's starting to actually show up. Okay, so what I want to do is I kind of want to maybe rotate this. So I'll just do something real simple. We'll just maybe add a rotator. We'll need a time node. We want to multiply this time node against some scalar. You can hold S, click in the graph to add a scalar, and call this our rotation speed. We'll try 20 starting off. So now we got these. We'll pass this into the time node, and then we want to pull into a subtract. And then we want to hold the 2, click in the graph to add a constant 2 node. We'll do 0.5 by 0.5. Add that into the B channel there. Hold D, click in the graph to get a divide node. You can hold S, click in the graph, add another scalar that we can call our zoom scale. This is only if you need to be able to zoom in or out. I don't think I'm going to be doing anything like that because I'll control that in the widget, but if you need to make adjustments here on the fly, this will give you the ability to do that. You can hold A to get an add node. If we hook this into the UVs, you're going to notice it starts rotating, but it looks a little bit weird. And that's just because we need to add the original piece to actually get it centered with this constant 2 node. And that gives us a really simple swirl animation, which we can make this work. So there's nothing really too crazy here. But let's go ahead and create a user interface widget blueprint. We'll call WBP underscore battle transition. We'll double click to add open that up. And just like most canvas, or most widgets, we add in a canvas panel starting off. And then we're just gonna add an image. I'm gonna anchor this center, hold Control, center, hold Shift, center, then it centers my item. And the brush settings, I can set it to use that M underscore battle transition material we just created. You can see it looks a little weird. If I check the box for size to content, you can see it centers it perfectly. It's a little bit small, but that's okay. We're gonna be adjusting the size using an actual animation anyways. I'm gonna call this my image, and we will set it to be a variable. And if we come to the animations, we'll add a new animation that we'll just call battle. And then I'm gonna add in, because I have the image highlighted, it makes it selectable in the add menu here. So I can add the image like so. Then I get the plus sign and I can target specific properties, one of which is the transform. Inside the transform is a scale. So I think I'll add the 0.1 or the 1 scale coming in. And then after 2 seconds, I want to scale by maybe 100. Yeah. So basically this will be the animation. It just, over 2 seconds, it just starts real small and goes really big. And then we could just play the animation in reverse when we're done. Something real simple, nothing crazy here. So we can compile, save. And then if we adjust the color and opacity, there's an alpha channel there. I can set that to 0, so it's basically hidden. So now if we zoom in, you can see it's gone. Can't see it, it's there. And then we come into the graph editor here. And we need to do a few things. We don't need tick or pre-construct, but under construct, we can cast to our player blueprint. And then I can use the get player character to fill out that object pin. And then I can simply promote this to a player reference variable. Now that I have that, I can create a custom event, and we can call this battle. Oops, I guess I can't. I used that for something. Oh, battle start. And then what we can do is we can take our image, hold Control to get a getter, set the opacity to 1, so it's visible. It's going to start off visible and really small. And then we can get our animation that we called battle. And then I can say play animation. I want to wait the length of the animation, which we set it for 2 seconds. I could then duplicate this and we will play it in reverse. And then I can wait another 2 seconds. And then after that, we can use our player reference. And if you remember, I think we called it finished battle. This is to give control back to the player. And then we'll want to hide the image as it shrinks down. So we'll set the opacity back to 0 so it's hidden. Now this is all well and good, but this only creates the logic, it never actually calls it. If we go back to the player blueprint, so we're back over here, you'll remember in the random encounters, it basically starts the function, stores the timer, and then the function basically calculates distance traveled. If we pass that threshold, we call random battle. Random battle's down here. It takes a 50-50 chance of actually starting the battle or not. If it does, we stop the player's movement, and this is where we can basically get that widget and call that widget code. So what we can do is we have an event begin play where we're creating a bunch of widgets that we did for other videos. So we'll create another widget. That will be our battle transition. And we're just gonna move these over a bit. All right, we'll promote this to a variable called my battle widget reference. And I'm gonna add it to viewport. You can add it to viewport because there's nothing on it, it's invisible. So that doesn't actually hurt anything with my particular setup. But you may need to add or remove it depending on what you're doing with your setups. So over here, I can then use that reference that we created. And now I can target all the custom events that we set up on that widget, which I think we did one battle start. So now with all this logic set up, we can see what this looks like. So I'll come over to the trigger zone. So I should be over. If I move a bit, you can see we do the transition, we transition out, and now I can move again. And then if I stay in the trigger zone, the fight zone, you can see it still triggers, does its thing, and now I can actually move around. Now this is just the encounter system, so we obviously will still need to set up logic to handle the actual battle system. But this is just, you know, one way where you can actually do that. And if we wanted to see what the other transition looked like, it's easy enough. You can just come to the texture and we can try swapping it to the other one. And you can make whatever special effects or material effects you want to use for your transitions. Older classic games, I think they just kind of black out the screen in a circle motion. So, you know, you can get crazy or simple with it, whatever you want to do. But yeah. All right, everyone, I think we'll cut the video here, but I hope you found some informative value that you can take into your own projects. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.